Welcome to another installment of Satan's Generals. Um, we've been talking about John Alexander Dowie most recently, and we're going to continue doing so. So far, I did an introduction showing where he got his start, and then my last video was just kind of winged. Um, I originally had one thing planned for it, and then another, and a bunch of things happened in between, and other people actually wound up releasing videos that did a really fantastic job um, covering Dowie in the interim. And so it kind of left me not knowing where to go. So I just decided, well, I'm just going to wing something from all the notes I've done and go ahead and get it up. Which that's what the last video was. I apologize if it was a little boring. I don't know. I'm sure it showed that I was a little tired when producing it. In fact, I fell asleep when I was rewatching it, and I hope that's not a sign that the video was boring, but rather that I was just tired. However, at the end of that video, I promised that we were going to look at some of the people who died at the hands of Dowie in the next video. While it's not a complete list, the partial list that I do have so far, there's articles regarding the deaths and the instances around it, and we're going to cover some of that. But before we do, I feel like I was not quite clear enough, or I wasn't clear enough on what exactly it was that caused, that was Dowie's responsibility, that put the responsibility on him. And that's it. He claimed, his doctrinal claim was that the atonement, the Christ's atonement on the cross was not just for spiritual reconciliation with God, um, to save us in a work of salvation, but that it was also for physical healing. He gets this very wrong. He perverts the message and ignores the fact that the healing ministry of Christ and the apostles was fulfillment of a direct fulfillment of a specific prophecy that we had in the Old Testament that identified Christ by the fact that he would make the lame walk and give sight to the blind again. And in fact, it's a little problematic because if you look at the prophecy in the Old Testament in most English Bibles, it doesn't have the line about restoring sight to the blind. Um, but it does when that same verse is quoted, when that same prophecy is quoted by the disciples and the apostle in the New Testament. Now, if you look at the Greek Septuagint, that line is in the prophecy in the Old Testament as well, that the Messiah will, restore sight to the blind. The Septuagint precedes the Masoretic text from which we get our English Bibles. So, yes, it was a fulfillment of a direct prophecy. It wasn't a gift for all times, as modern charismatics, who are descended from the movements of Dowie and Woodworth Etter and Seymour and Branham and John G. Lake. It wasn't a gift for all times. And the church didn't practice that for probably close to 1800 years until this new charismatic movement got started in the 1890s. And except maybe perhaps with the Montanists, which were condemned as heretic. But okay, before we get started, let me read a little passage from Galatians. Galatians 1. Paul, an apostle, not from men, nor through man, but through Jesus Christ and God the Father, who raised him from the dead, and all the brethren who are with me, grace to you and peace from God the Father and our Lord Jesus Christ, who gave himself for our sins that he might deliver us from this present evil age according to the will of our God and Father, to whom be glory forever and ever. I marvel that you are turning away so soon from him that called you in the grace of Christ to a different gospel, which is not another, but there are some who trouble you and want to pervert the gospel of Christ. But even if we are an angel from heaven preach any other gospel to you than what we have preached to you, let him be accursed, or I believe Catholic Bibles say anathema. As we have said before, and now I say again, if anyone preaches any other gospel to you than what you have received, let him be accursed. For do I now persuade men or God, or do I seek to please men? For if I still please men, I would not be a bondservant of Christ. Perverting the gospel. A new gospel, but not a new gospel. That's what John Alexander Dowie did when he claimed the atonement was for physical healing. That's what the Charismatics continue to do to this day. Rodney Howard-Browne, who came out of the Zionist churches of South Africa, which were established by a guy named Bryant and John Graham Lake, sent by John Alexander Dowie. He then, Rodney Howard-Browne, becomes part of what's known as the Toronto, what was it? Toronto something or other. I forget the name of it at the moment. Toronto outpouring or downpouring, something to that effect. And he influences churches like Bethel, with Bill Johnson, who now, these guys at Bill Johnson's church, they bring in this new age stuff, um, much like Mariah Woodworth-Etter did with trances, and now they're going and soaking. They lay out on the graves of men like John Alexander Dowie and Mariah Woodworth-Etter and Smith Wigglesworth to soak in their energies or remnants of the Holy Spirit that are in them, or some mess. But yeah, so they're preaching a false gospel. They're preaching it to make money. Um, but people are getting hurt. People are not seeking proper treatment for ailments because they're told by these people that they're healed already. Um, they're not only told that they're healed already, but to quit taking their medicines, that they don't need to see doctors. I personally had someone that was very important to me that dealt with this at Rodney Howard-Browne's church. But so we're going to look at some examples. And that's all this video is going to be, is the examples, so that you can see the history of this movement. Chicago, December 5th, 1894. Reverend John Alexander Dowie presides over the establishment at 6020 Edgerton Avenue, known as the Divine Healing Home. Must again admit there is nothing so certain as death. Albert Garbett, a youth who came from Minneapolis to submit himself to the healing powers of Dr. Dowie, that Dr. Dowie claims to possess, died today. The cause of his death was said to be spinal caries. I don't know that word, to be honest. Commissioner Reynolds gave permission for removal of the body to Minneapolis. The body was taken away on a Northwestern train consigned to an undertaking firm in Minneapolis. Reverend John Alexander Dowie refused to give any information concerning the death and became very angry when asked for them. By the way, I've done some research to see if I can find the grave of this Albert Garbett through websites like Find a Grave and Ancestry. I can't. Another accusation that was made by Dowie's contemporaries that he was moving bodies by night so no one would know what happened, that they weren't healed. He could tell them that they went away. Obviously, that didn't work here. Someone knew, and they asked Dowie about it, and he grew very mad. Um, July 29th, 1899. Mrs. Edward Flanders died of blood poisoning at St. Luke's Hospital last night after having been attended by divine healers during a critical illness by Mrs. Henrique Bratz, an official of Dr. John Alexander Dowie's Zion Church of Divine Healing in Michigan Avenue. Doctors who attended Mrs. Flanders when she was thought to be dying assert that she would have lived if she had been given proper medical attention. The State Board of Health has notified its attorney, John A. Barnes, to investigate the case. Miss Anita, that's her first name was Anita, Flanders, is dead by blood poisoning at St. Luke's Hospital after having been attended with divine healing during a critical illness by Miss Henrica Bratz, an official of Dr. John Alexander Dowie's Zion Church of Divine Healing in Michigan Avenue. Dr. T.J. Watkins and Dr. Thomas Curry of St. Luke's Hospital and Dr. H.G. Peterson, who were called to attend Mrs. Flanders when she was thought to be dying, assert that the woman would have lived if she had been given proper medical attention. The State Board of Health has notified its attorneys to investigate the case. Mrs. Bratz says that her patient's death is due to the fact that Mrs. Flanders did not believe in divine healing. The regulations of the law, she says, are not in accord with her faith of divine healing, and for that reason she has not obtained a license to practice medicine. That's something these faith healers continue to do when you finally realize that you weren't healed by them, because a lot of times people have an emotional response at first, they believe they are, and when they realize they aren't, faith healers blame them. They tell them it's because you lack faith. You don't have enough faith. You're not, so they blame the victim. Um, and that hasn't changed. That started back then with Dowie and Woodworth Etter and the early faith healers. And they still do it. And I have seen people hurt by this. I've seen it in Rodney Howard and at Donica Brown's church. I've seen it with the Bethel group. Um, though I've never been to the California campus, they have satellite campuses of what do they call it? The School of what is it? The School of Supernatural Ministry or something to that effect. Um, and when it happens to someone close to you, you you want to say something, you know? And that's actually what inspired me to start doing this in the first place. Um, August 10th of 1899, Mrs. Henrica Bratz and Elder D.C. Holmes, divine healers and officials at Dr. Alexander Dowie's institution, were held to the grand jury yesterday by the coroner's jury in the inquest. Sorry. Over the death of Mrs. Anita Flanders. They are charged with being criminally responsible for her death, who died of blood poisoning at St. Luke's Hospital on July 28th after receiving their divine healing treatment. The specific charge was criminal negligence and malpractice. They were both arrested and locked up. Um, let's see. Let's find another one. This is more about Miss Flanders' death. It says at 6 o'clock last evening, the gate of the county jail swung open to admit Miss Henrica Bratz and DeWitt C. Holmes. The prisoners were supplicants and divine healers in the Dowie institution and were held responsible by a coroner's jury for the death of Miss Anisha Flanders. It was the first stage in a case that promised the most rigorous investigation into the workings of Zion ever made. Mrs. Flanders lay ill for days, tortured by indescribable agonies, with no attendance save of the two who prayed unavailingly at her bedside. Then a doctor was called. It was already too late, and after 5 days of unconsciousness at St. Luke's Hospital, the woman died. Elder Holmes and Miss Bratz were taken to the jail in a covered patrol wagon 5 minutes after the verdict was made known. The investigation of the coroner was conducted by Deputy Coroner George B. Ebb. The verdict stated that Mrs. Flanders came to her death from peritonitis and puerperal septicemia. I I'm not familiar with these medical conditions. I'm sorry, or how to pronounce them. They may not even be called that anymore. Um, at St. Luke's Hospital, caused by criminal negligence and malpractice on the part of DeWitt C. Holmes and Miss Henrika Bratz. A minimus was issued on the spot, and soon the two were behind bars. There, the elder lost his title and became known as the Man in 513, and Mrs. Bratz was, of course, incarcerated in the women's section. The routine of the case at the jail was relieved by an amusing incident that happened as the prisoners were leaving their valuables in the office. Turnkey J.F. O'Neill had just taken a handful of cards from Holmes' pocket when then the preacher handed him one after sorting them over, on the back of which was printed the large letters, "Search me, O God." O'Neill held his sides until the man had gone out of hearing. Okay, so he pulled a card out of his pocket that said "Search me," and the cops thought it was funny. Then there was a perfect explosion in the office. Holmes had nothing to say when seen later on the third floor. "Is your face shaken?" he was asked. "No, the Lord will provide. I can't say who will be my attorneys nor what will be my defense." Mrs. Bratz was equally uncommunicative. "Is this your first time in jail?" she was asked, and she replied, "Yes, glory to God." "Has your faith weakened?" "No, it's stronger than ever." A strenuous effort was made by another member of Zion to secure the release of his co-workers on a bond. He said he had arrangements all completed for attorneys and a bondsman. As Holmes passed into the jail, he attempted to hand a fat wallet to an outsider, but was prevented by the officers. The assistant then started off in search of the helpers he expected at a late hour. He had not succeeded in persuading any judge to accept the bonds and release them. Uh, let's skip forward. According to the testimony, he was called to see the woman July 22nd. She had given birth to a child 5 days before, and he found her in a serious condition. Her temperature was 105. The woman was taken to St. Luke's Hospital, where she died. Mrs. Bratz told the doctor she was not a licensed midwife, but had practiced as such. She told me she trusted in the Lord. The witness said the witness. Mrs. Bratt was examined and gave damaging testimony against herself. She insisted that she had never had any misluck before. Edward Flanders, husband of the dead woman, who lives at number 1608 Indiana Avenue, told how Mrs. Bratz had visited his flat and insisted on attending on his wife for a fee from $5 to $8. After his wife died, Mrs. Bratt reproached him, he said, charging her to his unbelief. I believe they meant to say charging him, like still charging him that $5 to $8 even though his wife died. And they did nothing. Let's move on. August 20, when is this? This is again Miss Flanders. There's a lot of articles about Miss Flanders. But this one, why did I include this to be covered? Oh, because Dowie. He vented his wrath against the doctors in the newspapers of Chicago Sunday in an address before a large meeting at Zion Tabernacle. The fierce abuse in language, most foul, had for its purpose revenge against the doctors because they caused the arrest of one of the elders of his church and one of his members for malpractice and criminal negligence, in the case of Mrs. Flanders, who died recently. The newspapers and their employees were scoured for reporting the affair. He mentioned one after another of the newspapers and told the wrongs they had done to him. This is a practice of Dowie that dates back to his days in Australia. He used to do that there. It was always the newspaper's fault when they reported anything he did. This one article goes on. He accused all of the newspapers of lying and called reporters as a whole a disreputable set, qualifying the term with numerous foul adjectives. Of Joseph Medal, he said, Joseph Medal was a wicked man. He was a bad man. He lied about Zion. Of Mr. Flanders, the husband of the woman who died under the care of the members of Zion, who was in the audience, he said, This Dowie says this about the guy. You should have committed suicide when you said you would. Been, then there would have been one dirty dog less in Chicago. Of lawyer Stevens, also in the audience, he said, "Stand up, you scoundrel, in the name of the Most High God, I brand you as a liar, a traducer of a widow and a scoundrel." One of his remarks was a prophecy that before long all the wicked Chicago papers would be driven from the field by the Zion Morning Sun and the Zion Evening Star. And another was a threat that Governor Tanner and the State Board of Health, or Death as he called it, would be held financially responsible for the arrest of the Zion workers in the Flanders case. So here we have a prophecy. We got a prophecy by John Alexander Dowie that all the wicked papers would be driven out of Chicago and replaced by his own papers. The prophecy didn't come true. I believe the Bible says about a prophet who tells a prophecy that doesn't come to pass, that man's a false prophet. Um, let's see. Okay, this is more about Miss Flanders. I don't want to cover her any further. Let's see. Uh, okay, here's another one. John Broberg, employed at the Kimball Carriage Factory in Michigan Avenue, is a widower who took his children to live at 14 16th Street, not knowing it was one of Dowie's boarding houses. A month ago, one of his little boys fell off a wagon and hurt his chest. Pneumonia resulted, and for 5 or 6 days the women in the house prayed for him. He grew worse, and the father realized that he was dying and said he was going to call a physician. One of the Dowie elders was sent for by the boarders, and he and Broberg engaged in a fight which the police had to stop. Under a guard, Dr. Patton was inducted into the house and there treated the child. The physician says the boy would have died in a few hours as his temperature had already reached 106. But when removed from the Dowie house and under medical care, he recovered. That's from the Chicago Record. And I didn't give you a date for that one. Let me see if I can find it. August 25th, 1899. Or 26. I'm not sure. It's either 25th or 26th. Um, let's see. What's next? Another victim of faith healing. From the Evening Times, September 7th, 1899, in the District of Columbia. See, Dowie, his he was his cult spread across the country. It still exists. Um, Another victim has been added to the leading list of patients treated by the followers of faith healer John Alexander Dowie by the death of Ira L. Peck of Seneca Lake, New York. Mr. Peck's sister married Elder F. A. Graves, a Dowie adherent, and claims to have been cured of a serious disease through the medium of faith. Consequently, when Peck was taken ill 2 weeks ago from typhoid fever, the family insisted on resorting to faith cure remedies. Mr. Peck assented to the proposition, and no doctor was called. He grew worse rapidly, and in a week was delirious, but still no medicine was given. Finally, he died. Uh, February 9th, 1900. The trial of John Alexander Dowie's guards at Crown Point, Indiana, on the charge of an assault took a curious turn yesterday when 5 of the Zionites who were present as witnesses were arrested. Carl struck a Zion guard, was on trial, charged with beating A. A. Walker in the riot that occurred at Dowie's meeting at Haman on October 27th. John Vance, a witness for the defense, swore he and not Struck assaulted Walker. It's actually Fontence. Was He was placed under bonds to await the action of the grand jury. The other witnesses who had gone from Chicago to testify in behalf of Struck were put under bonds, At the meeting in question, Walker made a speech saying his wife had been deluded by Dowie's teaching, and when his child got sick, she would not permit a doctor to attend the child, which then died. Dowie is the head of the Christian Catholic Church. February 19th, 1900. W. F. Green, a hardware manufacturer of Troy, New York, died suddenly at the Zion of Dr. Alexander Dowie Friday. Death is said to have been due to heart disease. The case was not reported to the coroner until today. Miss Adelaide Green, a relative, claimed the body and will send it to Troy. Apparently, they didn't report that one for 2 or 3 days after the guy died. I'm sure they were looking for a way to move the body out without anyone knowing, which was a common habit with them. May 2nd, 1900, we have another case. Says other duties interfered and a postponement made necessary. Exhumation will take place today. Something of the character of the new-fangled religion to which Mrs. Newell, it is believed, died as a blind martyr. Dowie, its founder, hissed at Philadelphia. Wow, he hissed at the whole city. Not uncommon for him. Um, Owing to the pressures of other business yesterday, Coroner Roberts was compelled to postpone the exhumation of Mrs. C.F. Newell's body until today. In the interim, parties who may have wanted as witness in the inquest that will follow are being kept under surveillance so that they may be prevented from absenting themselves should they be moved to take such a step. The coroner is determined to probe this case to the bottom, and if it proves to be what his investigations thus far indicate, he will leave no stone unturned to make an example of those whose neglect is supposed to have been responsible for the woman's death. One of the women who was at the Newell house when the coroner was first called upon to investigate the case admitted to him that nothing whatever had been done in the way of medical or surgical treatment. How do you excuse yourselves for this neglect? The coroner asked her. The Lord has promised to look after us in our illness. We should not interfere. The Almighty is certainly capable of carrying out his promises. The following concerning John Alexander Dowie, the messenger of God, who is at the head of the faith which the unfortunate Mrs. Newell embraced and followed blindly to her death. This article goes on, but there's no reason to read further on her. We already know she died because they wouldn't give her medical attention. In fairness, a lady named Mrs. Boyd was arrested and held responsible for that death. Miss Boyd responded. The devil may lead some fools to arrest Mrs. Boyd. Oh, Dowie responded. The devil may lead some fools to arrest Mrs. Boyd, but the more I investigate this case, the more firmly I'm convinced that it was no small wonder that the woman died, when we take into consideration her gross negligence before the child was born. It was indeed a small wonder that she died. So, yeah, Dowie's blaming the victim again. It's her fault. She was negligent. It didn't have nothing to do with the doctrines or me telling her God's gonna heal her, just give me more money. Um, pathetic. Cincinnati, Ohio, September 8th of 1900. Paul Steele Valiva, age 4 years old. This is the son of Dowie's second in command. Paul Steele Valiva, age 4, died at the residence of his parents at 3226 Fredonia Avenue last night. The child was sick several days, but no physician was summoned, the parents being members of the Dowie Church. Death was due to spinal meningitis. The child's father is Elder Wilbur G. Valieva, the personal representative in the city of John Alexander Dowie. The followers of the church do not believe in the use of drugs or medicine, but only in the, they didn't say only here, but it's true, only in the efficacy of prayer. The boy was taken ill last Sunday. He had a high fever and almost doubled himself in his agony, and his screams rent the air. Unconsciousness came to him 3 minutes before death, and then his father's prayers ceased. He was screaming in agony, and they still didn't get him any medical attention. December 3rd, 1900. Death has entered the household of John Alexander Dowie as a result of the faith healer's teaching against the use of medicine. Mrs. Samuel Stevenson, wife of the deacon, who came to Chicago last summer from England, where he was a lace maker, to help the head of Zion introduce the lace making industry in his Lake County city, passed away while crossing the ocean. Mrs. Stevenson had gone to England with her husband, and last week left her father there and started on the return voyage. She was taken with pneumonia on shipboard, but medical attendance was not given her and she died. She was buried at sea. Her husband has arrived in New York and is on his way to Chicago. Deacon Stevenson and Dowie's daughter, that okay, so this lady, Mary Stevenson, her name's Mary. Her maiden name's Mary Dowie. Um, this reporter calls her his daughter. Some other reporters call her his sister. Um, all I know for sure is that she was related to Dowie. I believe she was a daughter that Dowie later didn't mention because he couldn't heal her. Um, but and this article goes out of the way to say that she left her father, back in England. You don't want to admit you were there on the voyage where if you're a faith healer and your daughter or sister, whoever dies. But it says Deacon Stevenson and Dowie's daughter were married at Zion Tabernacle in Chicago last July, and the ceremony was a great event among the followers of the divine healer. Mary Dowie Stevenson, married to Samuel Stevenson, who was the deacon in Mary's father's church. Here's another article on her, Mrs. Samuel Stevenson, sister of John. So here's another one that says it was a sister and not a daughter. Sister of John Alexander Dowie, died of pneumonia and was buried at sea. She refused medical attention. That one really oversimplifies it. December 1900, a Tribune special from Boston Harbor says Charles Mosher, aged 35 years, and his son Harold, aged 10, are dead from typhoid fever, and a daughter is not expected to live. The mother was sick but is recovering. The father died yesterday while the boy died Sunday. The family are followers of John Alexander Dowie and refuse to have physicians. The sick members refuse to take medicine.